In this podcast episode, Ben Shapiro addresses the surge of radical Islamic terror attacks in the United States, the domestic and political responses to terrorism and Islamophobia, and the broader geopolitical conflict involving Iran and its destabilizing activities. He explores key incidents of terrorism, the challenges of immigration and vetting, the role of American political figures, policies on citizenship revocation, and the ongoing military efforts aimed at countering the Iranian regime. The discussion also touches on cultural topics, such as the upcoming Oscars. Ben Shapiro details two significant Islamist terror attacks that occurred in a single day. The first took place at Old Dominion University, where Mohammed Bailar Jallo, a naturalized citizen linked to ISIS, fatally shot a professor after shouting Allahu Akbar. Jallo had a known history of supporting terrorism, having been previously arrested for attempting to buy weapons and released early for good behavior. The second attack targeted a Jewish synagogue in West Bloomfield, Michigan, where Iman Kalazi, also a naturalized citizen, attempted to detonate explosives. Security personnel promptly neutralized the threat. Shapiro highlights the critical role of armed security in thwarting these attacks and raises concern over the radicalization within U.S. communities, such as Dearborn, Michigan, where there have been troubling signs of terror sympathies and support for extremist figures. The episode explores the contentious debate over radical Islam versus Islamophobia. Shapiro critiques what he views as the media and political elites' tendency to label any critique of radical Islam as Islamophobia, thereby shielding terrorist supporters from accountability. He recounts personal experiences and historical instances of discrimination against Muslim Americans, but insists that the genuine threat lies with radical ideology, not moderate Muslims. He points out the dangers of conflating radical extremists with the broader Muslim population and criticizes public officials who appear to excuse or downplay terrorist actions. Prominent politicians, such as Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, and New York Mayor Zohran Mamani, are scrutinized for their alleged sympathies toward radical Islamist causes. Shapiro cites examples of Mamani's associations with known terror supporters and critiques the failure of political institutions to confront radical Islamic influence. He contrasts Mamani's condemnation of anti-Semitism with the controversial views held by his family members. The situation in Dearborn, Michigan, illustrates local governance tolerating or even honoring radical activists, further complicating efforts to combat domestic terrorism. Shapiro discusses how inadequate vetting and immigration policies contribute to the threat of radical Islamic terrorism. He explains the surge in habeas petitions filed by immigrants to circumvent deportation under recent administrations, resulting in the release of potentially dangerous individuals. The difficulty of revoking citizenship for those linked to terrorist groups is examined through legal frameworks such as U.S. Code Title 8, Sections 1484 and 1145(1). Although revocation is legally possible, enforcement is complex and rarely applied, allowing many with extremist ties to remain free. Shapiro advocates for stricter immigration controls and more rigorous enforcement or reform of laws governing citizenship eligibility. The episode also addresses how radical Islamic states, particularly Iran, export terrorism and radical ideology globally, including into the U.S., Europe, and Latin America. Iran's strategy involves maintaining sleeper cells and influencing left-wing activists who oppose American policies and support hostile regimes. Shapiro critiques narratives blaming American actions for terrorism, emphasizing instead Iran's responsibility for inciting violence and destabilization. The podcast presents Iran as a central threat that uses terror proxies and ideological influence to challenge U.S. interests. A substantial portion of the episode centers on ongoing military operations against Iran's regime. Guest John Spencer, a military analyst, explains that U.S. objectives include denying Iran nuclear capability, destroying its missile infrastructure, and dismantling its navy to prevent control over critical regions like the Strait of Hormuz. The podcast highlights Israeli drone strikes, the damage sustained by Iran's military, and the regime's apparent leadership disarray. Special operations and strategic targeting of economic and military assets, such as Carr Island and uranium facilities, are discussed as potential actions to hasten regime collapse. Despite uncertainty in warfare, current assessments suggest progress toward U.S. goals and a safer regional landscape. Shapiro discusses contrasting political reactions to the U.S. approach in Iran. Some politicians, such as Senator Chuck Schumer, emphasize defending Muslim Americans and condemning Islamophobia, while others like Senator Tommy Tuberville highlight the dangers of radical Islam. Media figures and commentators are criticized for either downplaying terrorist attacks or blaming the U.S. for provoking violence. Examples include CNN analysts who attribute recent terror incidents to the consequences of American foreign policy rather than addressing the ideological roots. The segment stresses the importance of clear-eyed recognition of radical Islam as a threat without conflating it with all Muslims. In a lighter segment, Shapiro previews the upcoming Academy Awards, providing odds and opinions on the Best Picture and Acting categories. He expresses skepticism about the quality and political motivations behind nominated films, particularly critiquing those perceived as pushing ideological agendas. Shapiro predicts that the film Sinners, despite its flaws, might win Best Picture due to its alignment with progressive themes, while praising some performances he considers overlooked or underrated. The episode closes by promoting additional content available to subscribers, including a more interactive format where Shapiro and co-hosts discuss current events, media narratives, and entertainment topics. He encourages listeners to engage with this extended material to gain deeper insight into ongoing discussions surrounding terrorism, politics, and culture.